the vinyl pressing. People seem to be really fascinated with vinyl because it sort of made a big resurgence. The process was like this. You would create a reference acetate disc for the producer and the artist to hear what you did with the mastering. So they'd make a special disc that we used to get. I think it cost $100 or $150 for this specialized disc that we could take home after the mastering session, listen to it on our home stereos, bring it to our friend's house and listen on their stereo, and either approve the mastering or not approve it. When it was approved, a lacquer disc was cut. This is out of the soft black plastic kind of looking stuff, and it was inspected with a microscope for physical defects or any sort of problems. I used to have a friend that worked at a mastering lab, and he had, in a frame on the wall, he had a disc that was being cut right when they had an earthquake. So the disc was halfway cut, and then the needle went off the disc. And so that's what they would inspect for, is defects in the disc. But he framed it because he thought it was so cool. It captured the moment in time that they had an earthquake. So the lacquer disc is inspected, and it has very limited number of plays. The acetate that we could take home only had maybe 1, 2, 3 good plays, and then it would totally deteriorate in terms of its sonic quality. The final master was created from the lacquer cutting, which was basically considered, they called it the master, or the mother. So a thin layer of silver was applied to the lacquer to create the mother. So they'd take a thin layer of silver on this disc that was cut into the soft plastic. And then they would use the mother to create stampers, which for each side of the disc had its own stamper, which was made out of nickel, and it was electroplated chromium, and it was the exact inverse of what the mother was. Okay, so they'd take the mother, because it was silver plated, and they'd put these other metals on top of it and create the exact inverse and split them apart, and you'd have the inverse of what the mother was. And so that became a stamper, and it was put on a machine, and then the stamper was used to stamp out one side of the vinyl from a disc on a biscuit of precise thickness of vinyl. And then the discs were cut, dry, they actually cooled because they were hot. They would cool, and a hole drilled in the center, and then the disc was labeled and packaged and sent out. So it was a very inexpensive process. This is what it looked like. So they're ready to stamp. There's a stamper on both sides, and they would toss a biscuit of vinyl in the middle that was hot, and it would stamp down, and it would squish out the sides and cut off around, just like you're making a waffle, pretty much. This is what the vinyl pebbles started out looking like, and they come in different colors, so you can make colored discs and all that stuff. They'd melt it together and become, this is what the biscuit would look like. But it was precisely a certain amount of vinyl that would fill in perfectly for the size record you're doing. And the normal production line of one plant could produce 185,000 discs per day. So to produce 1 million discs would take about a week. Colored and vinyl discs, so you can get them all different colors and all different sizes. But there were problems with vinyl. Problems existed from dust. If you scratched the disc, then the needle wouldn't ride properly in it. You'd get horrible problems with the sonic quality. Static, warping. You'd have to clean the surface with this thing that I pictured here, which was wooden on one side and sort of this soft material on the other side. And you'd clean the surface of all the dust so that the dust wasn't in the groove and making the needle not play properly. You'd use distilled water, all this kind of mechanism to make the needle play right on the disc. But of course, the warping of the disc was really a problem. It would create so much wow and flutter, so the disc would spin around, one side would be lopsided as it spun, and the needle would ride on it, and because of gravity it would go, you'd have this wow and flutter sound out of it. And there was no real way to fix it. It was really tough. I mean, I tried everything from pressing it between books and leaving it in the sun. You leave a vinyl record in the sun, it gets warm, it'll start warping on you. So it was a real problem. You had to really be careful with your discs and how you stored them. So this is how the turntable playback was, which gives you sort of an understanding of how the needle is on sort of this fulcrum that moves. The needle is on this side over here, and it rides in the groove, and as it moves in the groove, it moves this other end, and there's a magnet that's with different coils of wire around it that would wiggle in between the wires and create different electrical impulses. Here's a picture of a real needle on a turntable, and that's how it worked. Here's maybe a better example so you can understand how it works. So the needle sits here and it rides in the groove and it moves back and forth, and there's a right coil and a left coil. So the magnet on the other end of the needle passes through a coil of wire, creates a small impulse of electricity. This is what a clean groove looks like up close. You see how simplistic it is in terms of the concept of what it's doing? But the needle would move relatively quickly through these grooves because it would spin rather quickly, and it created the impulse that would create the music. Okay, so other issues with vinyl: speeds vary, and it affects the sound reproduction. The curvature of the disc itself, too, affects the sound. So if you're in the closer side of the inside of the disc, the curvature that the needle had to follow was a lot more steep. So the sound would be different than if it was riding on the outside of the album. And you'll typically find on vinyl albums that ballads are on the inside of the disc, usually the last one on the side. I always thought it was because it was more creative, and it kind of was like a whole like show. Each side had its own, running time and its own sort of pace that it would play at. But actually the fact is that the ballads performed better on the tighter curvatures in terms of the sound. Wow and flutter, caused by disc flatness, heat and sunlight can cause the warping. Turntable consistent speeds, that was also a really big issue. They went to great lengths to give you turntables with all sorts of ways of knowing that it was running perfectly on speed. The needle weight, so if it was too heavy in the groove, it wouldn't track as well as if it was, and if it was too light, it wouldn't track very well. And so it had to be just at the right tracking weight. You get small pre-echoes caused by adjacent grooves. Static can build up and cause pops. All these little issues needed to be dealt with vinyl. The digital age. So you've got discs now. Now, first of all, discs don't need the RIAA curve and pre-emphasis and post-emphasis for the medium to actually capture the music, because it's a digital medium now. So you don't need the RIAA emphasis. A mother's not needed. A stamper's not needed. Dither is needed. Equalization, dynamic control, and master format needed. So you needed to master it to a certain format so players would play it. So it had its own set of needs when you go to the digital domain for mastering versus the vinyl domain. It had its own set of requirements. This is a really interesting slide because it shows you how a disc is actually made and how it actually performs. And I don't know how many people actually still use discs. Anybody? They're sort of outmoded now too, aren't they? The way it works is the bottom layer is just a clear plastic disc with a photosensitive material that's been encoded using bumps. The next layer is a reflective layer, then a lacquer protective layer on top, and the artwork is printed on the lacquer layer, and then the laser comes up through the bottom, through the clear plastic, and reflects off the reflected layer. And it's reflected one way or another based upon the pits that are detected. They deflect or reflect the laser back. Here's maybe a better example. So this is what the pits look like. So the laser hits it, it's either deflected or it's reflected back. And when you burn a disc, right, with a burner, it actually uses this photosensitive material to take a laser to burn spots out of the disc, and they become blackened, and so they don't reflect back. So that's how you get a 1 and a 0. You get a reflection back, it's a 1. You don't get a reflection back, it's a 0. And the digital discs also work in a spiral fashion, just like the vinyl discs. Burn discs don't last as long. And actually, the next thing we're going to talk about after this is data storage, because that's really critical, right? If you lose your data, all your work's out the window. So, but burn discs, we'll talk about the length and what to do about that. Compact discs holds 650 to 700 megabytes, 74 to 80 minutes of audio. Data is kept on the top surface of the disc. So most people think it's the bottom of the disc that matters, and it isn't. The bottom of the disc is just plastic, and it can be scratched, and then it can be buffed out. As long as it doesn't reflect the laser, in a funny way, it'll read right through it. So they used to have these disk cleaning systems, and all it would do is buff up the bottom so that the laser could read through it more effectively. I know me personally, I used to have a big disc collection. I used to take turtle wax, car polish up my discs on the bottom so that they'd work really well. Because if it doesn't, then you get these digital errors that are pretty ugly. It records in a spiral-like fashion, like groove on an LP. And a CDR is a rewritable, but it's burned to create pits, like we just saw. The Redbook standard is 44.1 kilohertz sample rate and 16-bit depth. Very limited life compared to tape because it's photosensitive. If you leave it in the sun long enough, it'll actually change the data that's on it. It'll take a while, but it will do it. It'll destroy the data.